Hi guys, it's Jacob from Stringbuzz here, stringbuzzworld.org being the music journalism site, links are in the description down below. And yes, it is the return of the music podcast, which we were sort of planning on doing a little while back and we never really stuck to a routine. The Music Chatter podcast, as you can obviously tell by the title. And yes, I am here alone for this one. I think this will be happening every now and then when we can't get Matt in for certain reasons, obviously for traveling and schedules and stuff like that. But I also want special guests eventually on here. I might be pulling some of the independent acts which I often deal with on the site and through promotional schemes. I might be getting them to appear on this podcast. And if you've got any ideas for people to appear on this podcast, then please just leave them in the comment section down below. Message me, message the Facebook. Make sure to just basically get your voices heard. So hopefully this won't be as rambly as the last podcast, because I realize I can go on a bit, but then I just like talking about music. And if you just want to stick something like this on in the background, then hopefully you can be relaxed by my ever-soothing voice. But anyways, we've got a couple of they're not real questions this time around like we had on the last sort of podcast, but more statements. And just now we're sort of hitting the halfway point for the year now. You know, we're only a couple of days off the 6-month mark. I mean, where has this year gone so far? Even though each week feels like it's dragging, but none of that personal stuff anyways. So the majority of this is going to be more about statements really, and just summing up what we've had so far from this year. And there's going to be sort of like the final statement thing, which I've got towards the end of this podcast, which I'm going to be talking about later. Yeah, that's going to be that's less of a statement really, to be honest, but more a grounds which I think is important right now, something that keeps rearing its ugly head at the moment. So we're going to go through the best music I've heard thus far this year, the worst music I've heard thus far this year. We're also going to be talking about some upcoming projects which I'm involved in, which Stringbuzz is actually involved in as well. Sorry for the little baby burps that may be happening through this. Drank one too many beers really. And then the final thing which we're going to be talking about here, I've got it all written down on a lovely little card with no branding on it, of course, is about musicians and artists who are offending their fans or issuing statements against their fans who don't like their particular new style of music or their new, I don't really know the best way of saying it, their new direction, I guess. But we'll get further into that much later into this podcast. Anyway, starting with the first thing here, we're gonna talk about the best music of this year thus far. I've got a couple of candidates on here. Some you may actually have heard of from reviews on the site, reviews on the YouTube channel, as well as what I actually talked about obviously in the first podcast. If I was really hyped for this upcoming album, they may have actually managed to feature on my best music of the year thus far. So we'll start with Dirty Projectors, who obviously released their new album fairly early on this year, which is one of the albums I had as my most anticipated albums of the year. I thought it was great. There are tons of fantastic tracks on there. I love Little Bubble. I loved Up the Hudson, whatever it's called that. Where You Are, the one with the female singer Rave or something like her name, it's just gone out of my head right now, but fantastic experimental album from start to finish as well. It's probably the most unique listen I've had thus far this year as well. It takes a sort of crazy experimental and tribal type nature which you hear in say like the Animal Collective, and they sort of combine that with almost R&B like vocals, soul like vocals as well. Obviously the lead singer of Dirty Projectors helped write the latest Solange album, I believe, so there's definitely some influence from that on here as well. If you didn't already know, I love that last Solange album. So yeah, it's almost the perfect sort of release to get me into this year, because it came out so early on and I was so anticipated for it, and it ended up being good. It got me sort of hyped up for the rest of the year, so it came out at the perfect time for me. Then we also have Ceramic's latest EP. Now he's more of an independent act / emerging act at the moment. He's appearing at a whole ton of festivals here in the UK this year. I'm actually going to see him a couple times this year, and this EP is great. It's combined sort of old style funk and like turn the lights down low baby type music, and it's just really good fun. He's got the best voice around at the moment, the best emerging British voice outside. It's between him and Jack Garrett for the best male singers or my favorite male singers at the moment. The instrumentation is always fantastic in his music. The musicality in general is just really good. Each song is very different but very catchy as well. Each song you will not get out of your head for weeks to come. It's like the Bruno Mars type music, but for the musician, I guess. Not taking anything away from Bruno Mars, I love his music as well, but this is more suited for, say, my taste, I guess. I've also enjoyed some of the tracks coming out from Haim at the moment. I know they're about to release a new album. The first two or so which they released, I was a bit iffy on, but they just released a song called Right Here, Right Now, something like that. Something along those lines. Again, it's just gone out of my head. I should have prepared for that a bit more, really. But it was a fantastic track. A bit of a spoiler alert, it could end up being the track of the month for this month quite easily. It's one of my favourite tracks of the year so far, showcasing a side from the group that I never really thought was there. It's almost progressive, definitely experimental. I didn't quite know how talented these three girls were until I heard this song. I thought they were just another sort of like almost Hanson-esque like sibling pop group, but they've proven me so wrong here with this track. Definitely recommend you check that out. Fleet Foxes have obviously released a couple of songs from this upcoming album ahead of this upcoming album release. I'm also seeing them at Latitude Festival this year. Those tracks are great. It's just more of the same from Fleet Foxes at this point. They're sort of medieval, tribal, experimental core music, which is just great. They had things like harpsichords and lutes in some of their tracks, and you just sort of expect those things right now. I also didn't write down on this list, Father John Misty, of course, has released probably the album of the year so far. Again, an ex-Fleet Foxes member. Just brilliantly written, almost Don McLean-esque as well. Have to include that. Great album, definitely check that out. I've also got Joey Badass on here. My favourite rap album of the year so far. I know a lot of people love the Kendrick album. I thought it was good. I thought it was not his best. I thought it was good. It wasn't really up my alley per se. It's not my favourite style. I've never really taken to Kendrick. His sort of natural tone just hasn't resonated with me all too much. Definitely respect him as an artist, but yeah, just not up my alley. Joey Badass, on the other hand, released a stellar album. Really enjoyed it. From start to finish, you have great lyricism, as you always do. The flow are always in and out of the beat and just inventive as well, and he's an unexpected artist. He's so unpredictable, and his beats range from old school type beats to modern, even sometimes modern trap, and it just works really well for me. And then my last on here is a surprising one, and that's Paramore. Paramore's new album is great. This sort of indie funk approach, almost British inspired indie funk, works really well with them. They're the only band from that era, the only pop rock / pop punk band from that era that have transitioned into modern music without being super cheesy and cringe inducing. So yeah, definitely recommend you check that one out as well. So I think that'll do for my best music of the year so far, because I don't want to spoil anything when you look back at this, say if you're looking at the end of year sort of awards, which I'll eventually be doing. But that's just like a little summary of some of the tracks which have really stuck out to me thus far, and of course I recommend each one of these. We'll move on to the worst music of the year thus far anyway. And I will be missing quite a few off this list because there has been, I mean, January, February, and to be honest, the majority of March were very dry for me. With the exception of the odd big album release by the likes of Dirty Projectors, there was a period, I think, of 4 weeks where I only gave one above 5 out of 10 review, which it almost turned me off music reviewing. It was that bad. It was that just music which was just so dire. So obviously I'm not going to be going through lists and lists of bad music or music that could be in the running for worst music of the year towards the end of this year, you know, when it comes to that sort of award season. But we'll run off a couple which are still sort of strong in my mind. Of course, this new Linkin Park album, I know a lot of people have been giving it grief, and I've given it enough grief up to this point. If you've seen the reviews, you already know my opinion when it comes to the new Linkin Park album, and it's not just disappointing, but it's the general reaction. People trying to compare sort of evolving as an act and changing your direction to sort of devolving and stuff like that. It's a bit of a difficult one to sum up. Some people say that they've evolved into this new act, this new sound suits them much better and it's more modernized and stuff. For me, I think they've devolved massively. This type of pop music, this type of EDM music was great 10 years ago or so when they were already doing their sort of harder sort of stuff. So I think it's a bit too late now, and it's definitely cheesy. It sticks out as being outdated. And like I said, just check out my song reviews when it comes to Linkin Park. I'm not going to babble on about them too much here because I've done enough of that. We also have One Republic's track No Vacancy. Now, One Republic, I don't think they've actually released that much music this year thus far, but this song is so bad that I just have to point this song out, you know, individually. It's rubbish. It's sort of this dancehall type track. obviously, Ed Sheeran isn't actually in my worst music of the year sort of list thus far. It's bad, but One Republic took it a step further and just made it almost criminally bad. It took what the worst aspects of the latest Ed Sheeran album and just made it even cheesier, even putting on the full Caribbean accent. And with this track in particular, it was just unlistenable for me. Yeah, that could be a contender towards the end of the year. Moving on, we have Louisa Johnson. Just in general, every release I've heard from her, I know she's going for a bit of a crappy time at the moment with all these leaks and stuff like that, which I always think is horrible. So I don't really want to pummel her even more than obviously the media have been lately. But I think her music in general is just more of your sort of X Factor contestant core, you know, exactly like Little Mix, exactly like even One Direction to an extent when they went through a stage which was just releasing sort of bland like rip-off tracks. For Louisa Johnson, she just doesn't stick out at all. I know she's got a powerful voice, but she never uses it. All of her songs sound the same. They're too slow to dance to, they're too quick to really seep into, and she's just the blandest artist out there. Out of all the X Factor contestants, she has the blandest tone for me personally. I've just never taken to her music at all. Then we have Kygo, who is somebody that isn't explicitly bad. Like, I've never had a distinct hatred for Kygo's music. I mean, Kygo's just another DJ to me, really. But having said that, looking through, I think there's like 7 or 8 reviews I've done of his music thus far this year alone, and not one of them has got over 5 out of 10. It's just consistently average and generic. He writes the most generic of EDM sort of slash party ballad type things. Again, it's stuck in this mid-ground of wanting to be a party track and wanting to be sort of more of an EDM type ballad. All of his features, like Selena Gomez, recently Ellie Goulding, he's taken the worst aspects from them rather than actually highlighting what they do best. I mean, he completely stripped Ellie Goulding of all of her natural tone, which is criminal for me. And yeah, he's definitely on my worst music of the year list for just consistently releasing just filler for me. Every day I see like a Kygo track release and stuff, and I know that I have to review it. I just immediately know that the days sort of reviewing, that at least sort of half an hour to an hour spent on the actual reviewing side of things, not including the actual listens to that track. Yeah, it's going to be boring. It's always a boring day when Kygo releases a new track. And we've got Jonas Blue, who's a very popular DJ at the moment. Lots of people like him, but he's consistently my least favourite DJ now. Again, just going down this sort of whitewashed dancehall route with really bland features. They're famous in the oddest places. Like, he had an Australian X Factor, like 3rd place finalist feature on his latest track, and people seem to love him, but obviously I got a lot of hate for not really knowing who he was. Funny that. Yeah, I've never stumbled across him, but he's released quite a few bland tracks this year. I think what's more criminal for him is that he samples music that is so good and so solemn and like Fast Car, and just strips it of all its meaning. Like, Fast Car is quite an emotional thing about growing up as well, about unemployment, how difficult it was where Tracy Chapman grew up and having to cope with all these different things from such a young age, and how life's going so fast for her despite being so young, whereas this track was just made into I love you but you don't love me back, but we might love each other and love goes well quick. You know, it's just basically taking the lowest common denominator out of a song with so many layers. So yeah, I've never really taken to Jonas Blue either, so I think that kind of wraps up the worst music of this year thus far for me anyway. I know we're speeding through these statements a little more. It's quite easy to do that when you're by yourself doing a podcast, rather than obviously when I'm with Matt, we bounce off each other quite a lot. You know, a whole range of artists and ideas usually spring up from that. So we'll move on to sort of projects actually coming out now. I've started this sort of acoustic duo thing with Matt. Obviously you've seen on the YouTube channel a couple times, called Saving Acres. We've just launched our Facebook. We're about to sort of get into the studio, start recording an EP, and I'm really excited to do that. And the thing I'm excited about when it comes to String Buzz in cooperation with this project is that I would really like to launch a series which sort of is episodic into what it's like to start a band, for maybe those who haven't done it before, maybe those who are younger and they're looking about getting into a band. Because even though I'm hardly the most experienced candidate, I've had experiences before. I've been in many different types of bands, from pop punk to indie to heavy metal. I've also been in the studio with the likes of Gary Stevenson, who's sold 25 million records, with the likes of Bros, Rick Astley, Go West, ABC and all that lot. And I also helped produce a Snake Charmer Charmer album, which is doing really well at the moment. And I've just had lots of experience, obviously, when it comes to promotion and stuff like that, because obviously with the site and working with previous organizations and doing charity projects and all that sort of stuff. So I really wanted to make this sort of thing not as like an instruction type guide or anything like that, you know, how you should be a band, because it just doesn't work that way. You can't work that way. But rather it's going to be like an entertaining, almost reality type thing of what it's like being in a band and where things go and how quickly I do things, how quickly this project will go, particular things which we might do, particular things we might do wrong. And I think it could be, if we do it right, it could be really quite exciting. Obviously I don't have all the equipment to launch something which would be of the top sort of YouTuber level, you know, something which was really professional, but I'd like to make it as professional as possible, really take my time over it, maybe even if it's just one episode a month, maybe one episode a fortnight, because there won't obviously be tons and tons of stuff to talk about as well. It might be just little updates like social media and just researching for audiences and stuff like that, and promotions and all that sort of stuff. But like I said, for people who maybe are wanting to get into a band or have never been in a band before, or just, you know, they like the music reviews, they don't know how to play an instrument or anything like that, I have always wondered how music comes together, I think that could be a really exciting little project to really put together. When it comes to other projects, I love doing the charity stuff. Obviously we did this charity gig fairly recently, raised 430 odd quid or something for the General Hospital in London, King's College Hospital, that's it, in London. Obviously I'm still doing this thing in cooperation with Kids with Cancer UK, Children with Cancer UK rather, where we've been raising money from singles, busking, everything on the daily basis, hoping to just keep racking that up, and then we'll just throw it in a big lump sum, and that would be good fun as well. If there's any suggestions you can think of ideas to really go down with the String Buzz thing, with the obviously making a band sort of thing, or with the charity type stuff, if you'd like to see any sort of stuff along those lines, then please just, you know, leave it in the comment section down below. But we're going to actually get onto the meat of this topic now, and this is going to be obviously about offending fans who don't like your new sound. I mean, this is quite a common thing at the moment. Over the last 5 years or so, we're seeing the comeback of many groups from the sort of late 90s to early 2000s, which is always going to happen. We've seen it come back from the 70s groups, you know, with the likes of Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden still going strong right now. We've seen it with the 80s groups when David Bowie, obviously before his passing, releasing albums and the rest that goes along with that sort of era. And then we've seen the sort of early 90s never really sort of transitioned through that point because they were quite temporary artists, but when it comes to the late 90s and the early 2000s, they're still sort of fresh in this generation's mind, so they're going through this sort of comeback period, which is kind of strange. We've had the likes of Linkin Park, who've never really gone or split up, but I class this as a comeback. Same as Papa Roach, they've never really split up or gone, but they've left the mainstream or to the heights that they were before. All Time Low fairly recently have got back into it. Alien Ant Farm have fairly recently got back into it. Good Charlotte, Sum 41, and all these other acts. And it's been a bit of a strange one because I think production has killed. I've obviously already made a video on the YouTube channel about this. Production and overproduction has obviously hindered a lot of these artists rather than actually helping them. In comparison to, say, those 70s or 80s groups that have come back now, especially when it comes to like metal groups, they can now record such, you know, better sounding albums in general. I mean, the latest Black Sabbath album might not be up everyone's alleys, 13, but I really enjoyed it just because the production cycle was so good for it, and it made the riffs that much more heavy. And think that Tony Iommi was making really heavy riffs back in the 70s. How heavy they sound now with this new production is great for me, but it's actually hindering the groups from the late 90s and early 2000s with their sound, because obviously they were a bit poppy. A lot from that era was a bit poppier and a little more based on catchiness rather than musicality. And that is just an overview of the huge collective. Obviously there are specific examples that don't fall under that list. You know, when it comes to prog, there's never been a better time for prog in my opinion. But when it comes to that sort of era with those type of groups, they've obviously had this comeback. They've all released new albums. I mean, Sum 41 did, Good Charlotte did, Linkin Park did, All Time Low did, Alien Ant Farm did about 2 years ago. All these acts have released new albums, and there's a distinct theme that runs along all of them, and that's overproduction. You know, incorporating electronic elements that perhaps weren't there before, that they couldn't use before, things like pads and synths, as well as 808 drums and all that sort of stuff. When it comes to vocals, I think vocals have never been mixed worse than this right now. Too much gating, too much manipulation, pitch manipulation as well, because you don't have to rely on out and out auto tune anymore. You can just tweak little tiny bits. You can be much more specific now. So I think that's a big deal. When it comes to bass tones are actually better, obviously, as you think they would be. Drums, for the most part, are better if they don't use this sort of 808 approach. And it's been a bit of a strange one. Production has definitely been a big side of it, and I think that's what a lot of fans don't like about it. But the artist's response to this hasn't been as professional as I think it should be. Chester Bennington recently from Linkin Park said that if fans don't like his music, then they should say it to his face and he'll punch the pussies in the face. Like, that's not the best way of talking to your fans. I know there's many fans out there who are just screaming at you to re-release Hybrid Theory over and over again, and you can't do that as an artist. You want to evolve, you want to make better music, you want to make music that applies to you at that moment. But you've also got to remember your fans are there for a reason. The fans followed you for a reason as well. There are too many bands sort of coming back at the moment who they've just completely dropped what made them likable in the first place. They've gone down such a different style with no thoughts for their fans and what their taste might be when it comes to their music, relying too heavily on themselves really, that it has taken away from this sort of glowing appeal to them, and it is none more prominent than Linkin Park at the moment. Obviously, one of the starters up when it came to nu metal, rap rock, rap metal, and they did it really well. And then they went down sort of a really heavily electronic route, which I thought was decent. I didn't think it was great. I thought it was decent at the time. But now they're down this sort of EDM route, the thing which is really popular at the moment. It's flooded the charts. Everyone's doing it. Ed Sheeran's doing it at the moment, and he's meant to be an acoustic artist, so that just sort of proves it all for me, really. So they've gone down this sort of EDM ballad, maybe even trap influence every now and then, especially with this song with Stormzy and Pusha T sort of route, and it's in my opinion, it's not good. It doesn't sound like Linkin Park in the sense that none of the natural vocal tones are there, because Chester is refusing to put his rougher voice on now, which might be down to just, over the years, maybe straining it and stuff, but that was a huge draw when it comes to Linkin Park. Mike Shinoda sings now. He barely ever raps. He's had one verse or one or two verses which actually sound like him at all. He also rapped this one verse in, it was either it wasn't Invisible, it might have been Battle Symphony, or it was a song with Pusha T, Good Goodbye, where he raps in a trap style, and it's not him. And fans, by right, they can say that, we're not feeling this new route, it's not for us, it doesn't really sound like you, I'm going to give this one a miss. But then to say that you'd punch them in the face for not liking your music, like Corey Taylor said, you should be careful about saying those sort of things. That's exactly the route Suicide Silence went down, and they've released one of the most commercially bombing albums of all time fairly recently. And Suicide Silence are a great example of this. Obviously a tragedy that happened within the group. They replaced a singer, and then the whole band changed up their style a little bit to have clean vocals, which obviously didn't really work out from a musical standpoint. But instead of agreeing with the fans or taking the fans' opinion on board, saying that, we like this new style, we understand you don't like this new style, we're sorry for that, we'll see, if we can come to some form of arrangement in the future, just something simple like that, just at least to show that you care about the fans that don't get along with this new style. That would be much better than just slating them for not having the same taste in you. It was like if I did a review of say like Bon Jovi's new album, which I didn't like, and people by right said on the album review that they don't agree with me, that they don't like what I'm saying, they think I'm looking at the wrong things and I'm not looking at the broader aspects. And that's fine for them to think that. I'm not expecting people to listen to music in the same way I do. I've put my opinion out there, they've put their opinion out there. I haven't dissented their opinion, they haven't done it to mine. We might have debated a little bit about why, but nobody's offended by it or anything like that. But instead of debating, just offending and threatening your fans, that's not up my alley, I'm afraid. I mean, All Time Low didn't do this per se. They just said that they're sort of fed up of being these whiny teenagers, which I can kind of understand to an extent again. But if people want to listen to that and they miss listening to that, they can say that, and you're just going to have to deal with it, I'm afraid. When it comes to people like Alien Ant Farm, though, where they actually haven't offended fans in response, but have released an album which, half of it has been over studio tampered with, and it has not followed their original sound. I think being silent isn't the best way of dealing with it as well. If people have noticed criticisms and are pointing out criticisms, and you're an artist of that level, of that caliber, you've got to respond. You've got to respond in a way that is professional, and you've got to understand. You can't just be silent, because then it feels like you're not taking anybody's feedback on board. And I think that's none more prominent than the new Alien Ant Farm album. When it comes to likes of Good Charlotte, they just completely, they took their sound and they just completely depleted it of anything which made them popular in the first place. Again, largely down to production rather than the actual musicality of things, because it's not like Good Charlotte were a tour de force beforehand, but again, overproduction just killed it. Same with Blink-182 as well, overproduction just killing an album. But you've got to respond in a way that addresses this production. If you've got so many groups at the moment who are struggling with production, and people are pointing it out and not liking it and stuff like that, and again, you're just being silent about it, the next thing you're going to release is going to do the same, so they're not probably going to listen to it, or they might have just fallen out with you from that point onwards. I think there are too many fans either too many artists trying to insult fans, just misunderstand fans, be too silent and disconnected with fans as well. I'm trying to think of a great example really of a band releasing a poor album and then following it up really well. It's difficult because obviously it doesn't happen very often, and it is definitely an opinion-based sort of thing. But I guess you could. Well, take Alien Ant Farm for a great reason, actually. They released Up in the Attic when 2 of the band members had left, and they got in these other 2 band members. I think Ty and Terry left, the guitarist and bassist. And it was a bit of I enjoyed the album. I really liked the album, but the large consensus is that it was a bomb. It was a bit of a dud. And now they've come back ahead of this new album. They said that last one was a dud. They apologized for it, and they know they made mistakes. They know that it wasn't for everyone. And yet be silent over the exact same thing happening now is just you're just following into sort of old roots. And as you can see, the commercial success of these people eventually goes down, and I think that's a great shame as well. So I know I'm babbling on a little bit now, and we're sort of about to reach the 30-minute point, which is where I want to really cut off these little podcast segments, because until we've actually got more of a schedule, then I will know how many questions to actually put into these sort of segments. But I want to leave this, as a lasting sort of thing. Like, what do you think about artists at the moment who are having their comeback and they're offending fans, or they've gone down this new direction and they haven't really responded to any criticisms about it? Because I'd be really interested to hear your opinions about it, because obviously it is so opinionated and so different that you never know what the consensus is really like from a broad overview, because obviously I've just concentrated on pop punk and new metal bands there, but there might be metal bands and prog bands who have gone down the same sort of alley where they've changed their sound up and fans are reacting in a different way. So again, I'd like to hear your personal experiences. Again, tell me how you want me to change this podcast up in the future, who you'd like on here, who you'd like me to ask to get on here, things that you'd like me to do on here, maybe a reoccurring skit or something like that. Again, like the Saving Acres Facebook page, updates about that, about String Buzz on there as well, and the collaborations which are happening there. Hopefully we can get Matt back on here again sometime soon, because it's always easier to talk when you've got someone to bounce off to and just not in front of a laptop/phone screen. So if you like this video, then please leave a like, comment what you think in the comment section down below, subscribe to see more, and I'll see you around next time. Bye bye.